Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, getting insight on what just might be one of the movies of the year is a unique treat. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you are in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and we pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and conversational fashion. And if you like how we do things, you're here. I'm guessing that you do. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us over at Amazon, Apple, Spotify, Google, basically wherever you get your podcasts. We're not hard to find. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we'd really appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on the social media, as the kids call it. You can find us over at Facebook, over at Twitter, and over at Instagram at either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I say it a lot, it's the most important thing, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, the moving image at large. Because if we love to write about it and talk about it, we love it when you come and read about it. So please come on by. And we got contests too. So, you know, kind of have some fun and figure out what to watch. But we know what people are going to be watching today because it's in theaters. Probably as you are listening to this right now, it is Belfast from writer-director Kenneth Branagh, which we had the distinct pleasure of seeing at the Toronto International Film Festival, and it is just, it's a wonderful, sort of charming film about family, about neighborhoods, and just about how things change in life, and sort of dealing with those hiccups, but still understanding the importance of where you've come from. It's obviously a very personal film for Kenneth Branagh, and I'm pretty confident that it's going to be winning some gold this coming award season. But on that note, we had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with the editor of this film. It's a fantastic film. We talked with picture editor Una ni Dhonghaíle. I am horrible at pronouncing Irish names, and I apologize. But we had a lovely talk, and we really got some insight just in terms of the making of the film and just sort of the process therein, and especially working with Kenneth. She's worked with Kenneth a few times. And it's, again, it's a fantastic film, and it really, I think we really got a glimpse at the process of making what is a really beautiful film like this. But please check out Belfast. It is in theaters everywhere. And enjoy our talk with Una, which is happening right now. All right. Well, obviously, just first off, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate this.
Well, thank you for asking me, Dave. I really appreciate it too.
Now, I mean, congratulations on the film. I absolutely loved it. But I mean, I think my first question is because people tend to look at the job of the editor as being someone who's maybe sort of removed from the process, but really that isn't true at all. And you've worked with Kenneth on a few projects. Can you talk to me a little bit just how sort of intertwined, especially on a film like Belfast, you really have to be in sort of the entire filmmaking process?
Yes. Well, because it is such a personal film for Ken, and I think all of us who worked on it, we sort of embraced and took on board. It became personal for us as well. We really wanted to do a good job for him because it was a passion project, really. So I was working with Ken on Death on the Nile. And when the lockdown, the pandemic struck at the end of March 2020, the studio closed down. So I ended up going home to Dublin, where I have an avid music studio at home. And I was working remotely with Ken, finishing Death on the Nile. So in actual fact, that helped us sort of get into the groove. We had been working together from September. We had done all this through previous. So we had developed a sort of a kinship in filmmaking and storytelling, and we got on very well. We had similar taste, and we also were sufficiently different that we could sort of challenge each other and have a nice discussion to push the film forward. So then I returned in June to finish Death on the Nile and begin the handover to sound. And that's when Ken presented his script. So yeah, from the very beginning, we realized because of coronavirus that we'd probably have to do the whole thing remotely. And with the exception of the first 2 weeks of the shoot, we were remote, which meant that we had to work really hard to continue to talk, because of course I'd be his like right hand when he's shooting and I'm assembling every day. I had to feed back, obviously, like every editor, anything that I noticed, if they had to drop a shot or if they had to amalgamate scenes. I was cutting it together, building the film, so that every Friday night. So the first 2 weeks of the shoot, Dave, I was actually still in London. We were finishing off deliverables for Death on the Nile. So I was editing while he was shooting. And the first 2 Fridays of the first 2 weeks of principal photography, after shoot, Ken came into Twickenham, where I was in the cutting room. And he probably arrived at like 7:30 after, you can imagine, after the first week shoot, long days. But I had assembled the first week's rushes into a really good look. I had one first assistant, Carly Brown, who was working with me. So while I was cutting, I was giving the scenes to Carly, and Carly was building up the sound design and helping me pull it together. And then I was adding more sound to it, because we shot Belfast in England. The main body of the street was in a set in Surrey, beautiful part of England. So we had to build up, the soundscape of Belfast. And it meant that we sort of hit the ground rolling, because when Ken came in on that first Friday, we watched it through. We were discussing tone and pace and use of music. And then the following week, we did the same thing. And then I returned to Dublin, where he continued shooting and I continued assembling and just talking it through with him all the time. If we spotted anything that needed, developing, or scenes that we could sort of amalgamate to help his shooting if he came under time pressure with shooting. So I think, like all of us who are in the film industry, all of us have that good dialogue with the editor, or with the editor and the director, to help keep that communication going and making sure that we all are on top level before any sets are struck.
And that didn't even dawn on me, especially just given that this was shot during COVID. I mean, because I've got to imagine, especially in the film, some of those crowd shots, just because it looked very complex, just the way everything was staged and set up. I've got to imagine doing that remotely was a bit of a challenge in and of itself.
It was, and even when I went back to Dublin, for example, the good thing about independent films, and anyone who works on independent films, any editor, we're very good at assisting ourselves as well as being the editor, because you have to be a bit of a multitasker. So when I was working from Dublin, although I had my assistants in London, I was in Dublin. I had to download the rushes every day. So the way we worked it, we didn't use Evercast or anything like that. The way we actually did it was quite old school. Ken had an Avid installed in his home, where he could attach it to a big massive screen. My assistant could remote in and sort of update his bins with anything I was editing. Meanwhile, I was in Dublin. I was also downloading the media. So each person had a drive. So my assistant had a drive that they were downloading to in London. I was downloading to a drive in Dublin, and the drive in Ken's house was being updated by the assistant. So it meant that if I edited a sequence, I could literally email the bin to Ken. My assistant could put it into his Avid. He could sit down with a nice cup of tea and hit, space bar and watch it. And then if I had any updates, I could continue to email in that way. And then, of course, myself and Ken were on the phone every day at like 8 o'clock in the morning, talking through what we were doing. And if I had a few sort of ideas while he was shooting, I could put them. What I really love about Ken is he's a master storyteller, and he's actually a very gracious director to work with. So he would encourage sort of collaboration. So if I was doing something and I had an idea, I could do like scene 21 version 1, and then I could do like scene 21 version 2 alt, even version 3 alt if I saw something, and I could just, in the absence of him being beside me, I could send him these 3 versions. And then Ken was really brilliant. He was sort of he knew his story, he had written his script, he had lived this life. So then he was very gracious, I think, at looking at something. And if I did suggest something that he thought, okay, that rings true for him, he was saying, okay, let's try version 2, or let's stick with version 1, and maybe in 3 days time, whatever, maybe we'll revisit version 3. Or so we had a really good dialogue of what options we had in our rushes. So we knew that. I know when we finished, both of us were sort of talking to each other, sort of saying, we left no stone unturned. We really interrogated our rushes to make sure that we had the best film by the time we finished, which is good. It's a good place to be. Sometimes
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, obviously, this is a personal project for everyone involved, but I'm kind of curious. How does the job evolve when obviously you're having this back and forth with someone like Ken and putting all your effort into this film versus sort of taking a job from, like, say, a random TV show where you're like, you've got a shot list and you've just got to do it?
Well, you know what? Any job I do, I think I do what I do when I'm working with Ken. I think I always try it. And the films that I like to do, or the TV shows that I'm sort of attracted to, or the people who I like to work with are consummate filmmakers. And
Yeah,
like I feel myself say that editors, we're filmmakers too. We just are specializing in the craft of editing, but we're all storytellers, all of us in this job. All of us have those sort of bones. So I think I've always tried to do that, to work with people who also want, all of us want the best film or the best TV show, or we want to really push the boundaries to revitalize our audience and keep our audience gripped and empathizing with the characters. Or I'm also very interested, I do notice, because of doing interviews like this with you, it's sort of made me analyze what type of films I'm interested in editing. And although I'd love to do like a Marvel film, I love those films as well, because they also can reveal the humanity of people. You know, Guardians of the Galaxy is a triumph, in my opinion. And I have a sort of a social conscience that I know I'm attracted to films where we can bring a truth or an authenticity, or tell a story that hasn't been told before, or from a perspective that hasn't been shown before. And that's really exciting, I think, as filmmakers, that we can do that and we can pay tribute. You know, I did a show called Three Girls, which is a BBC show, but it's currently on Netflix. And that was a story to give voice to three girls, hundreds of girls, but we told the story of three of them who hadn't been believed by the authorities. So we were able to sort of show their point of view, tell their story. And I think with Ken's film, the same thing. He's telling a story that we haven't actually seen before. And that was really exciting to see it from a perspective of a working class Protestant family who actually were friends with their Catholic neighbours, and the dilemma of, do you leave the town of your birth where you have great friendships with your neighbours, you've got your extended family, you've got your grandparents. What do you do if a war breaks out and you are faced with, do you stay or do you go? And that really interested me. I thought that was a really good story on a universal level. This is specifically about Belfast in 1969, but actually I think the way he wrote it and the way he's made it, hopefully it speaks on a universal level to any family who has faced strife in their homeland and have to leave.
For sure. Now I'm curious, what is it about editing that sort of sparks you creatively? Because you studied this is what you went to school for. So
yeah, I did 4 years directing and cinematography first. When I first left school, I did a degree in that, and then I specialized in film editing, because even when I was doing the degree in directing, I ended up always editing. I directed my own little films, but I always was the editor of the group films. I love storytelling, and my parents and my grandparents, very much like Ken's parents and grandparents, were great oral storytellers in a time before all of this, possibility. So I feel like my grandmother, if she was alive today, she could very well be a filmmaker, because they told visceral stories. When I was a child growing up, my dad told the best bedtime stories, and my mom would be on the light switch. So they were mostly ghost stories. So at the end, when there was the punchline and my dad grabbed one of us, my mother would turn off the light, and we'd all scream. And as children, that sort of visceral storytelling, even for a bedtime story, stuck with me. And then we used to holiday down in West Cork in Ireland, and the local cinema, every time they projected the films, you could see the boom coming in. So they obviously didn't project at the correct aspect ratio. And at the time, my dad thought that it was because it was a very small family-run cinema. And my dad at the time, back then in the 80s, he said to me, "Oh, it must be that these are the cheaper films that they didn't get to get rid of the boom." Only when I went to college, I happened to go home and I said to Dad, "I think the projectionists didn't have to do the aspect ratio." But the good news is it made me aware when I went to see, The Hills of Eyes or whatever was being shown in Dunmanway, it made me aware that there was people behind the camera.
Right.
So from the age of 14, I always said I wanted to be a filmmaker. I thought I wanted to be a director, but actually once I started to study it, I realized the craft of editing was something that really worked for me. And I love it. And I love working with directors, and I love just the jigsaw of bringing everything together and working out the architecture of shots or how to move the scene forward and keep the audience empathizing with the characters. And that works for me.
No, and I mean, I think it's a reminder that every good storyteller needs an editor. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective as the editor, what is it about that related? Because the storyteller will never admit that they need an editor, but in reality, they all need an editor. From my level to Ken to everybody. Like, what is it about sort of the dynamic that you feel from your side of the aisle is important?
I think we're the first port of call. When we watch the rushes, we're the first audience. So if something works for us, I feel sort of quite confident. If it's working for me when I'm watching the rushes, I think it'll work for others. So for example, if I cut something together and you know, I know this is a bit of a cliche, but you know, the poor director is saying, but you haven't used that big crane shot, that beautiful shot that took 7 hours to do. But if it didn't ring true, or if it didn't push the story forward, I'm not wedded to those type of things. I'm more wedded to the truthfulness of the storytelling, or if it's an action scene, whatever's the best action to give the most visceral reaction to the audience. So I think what's good about editors, I think, is the fact that we are the first audience, and we can pull it together and try and make it work where it will work for another audience, or we see something. We have no prejudice. So if there was any difficulty on set where the poor director, every time he sees the scene or she sees the scene, they're just reminded by the difficulties they faced. We're free of all of that. We've got no baggage. We are just literally working with the story that's been told and how best to build that scene, or how to add sound design or music to enrich that story. So I think that's what we add. We add just that little bit of distance to see it with fresh eyes. And then, of course, that's where producers, the exec producers, are wonderful as well, because when they come on board, they also then have the fresh eyes, because you've been working so hard with the director, and then you get the notes from the studio or from the producers. You can get really great notes, or if you get notes that don't quite shine with you, but it could shine a spotlight on something that is really valid, and you can find a way of working it. Yeah, so I think an editor will always bring something. I hope so. I know so. I know they'll bring another point of view, which we could, as long as they're on the same page of wanting the best for the film. And I think that's what most every editor I've met, they're just lovely people, as well as great filmmakers.
I had never quite thought of it that way. Like, you're not emotionally invested that it took 6 hours to set up the shot. If it doesn't work,
Yeah.
it doesn't work.
Yeah, and also, you know, I'm a bit of a magpie. I love watching everything, because although I did 7 years in college studying film, and my mom always said she could have been a doctor, but I kept saying I really couldn't have been a doctor. I would have been a very bad doctor. I could have told a good story to the patient. But what I had after I did that, I did about 6 years of creative documentaries, and that meant I'm really good at watching rushes. I think, of just finding the best out of the rushes, even if it's before action or after cut, or finding a stolen moment that can feel or reveal something authentic for the audience. And I think that's what editors can also offer. We can spot something very beautiful that's very simple, and when we put it into the sequence, it can just ring true. And you know, I think that's a skill as well, of,
No, and
you
I
know,
mean,
understanding
yeah, I think
composition.
I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, it's so important to have so many different perspectives, especially when you're putting together a beautiful film like this. And I think you did a great job. And just thank you for the time today, and thank you for the
Well,
good work, and
thank you.
keep up the good work. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much, and thank you. Yeah, thank you for asking me to chat with you. I really appreciate it.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.